The date on my calendar read November 14th, and I already knew it would be the hardest day of the year. It always was. 3 years had passed since Margaret died in that hospital room with the pale yellow curtains and the hum of machines I couldn't make stop. 3 years, and November 14th still hit me like a fist to the chest the moment I opened my eyes. I lay in bed that morning listening to the silence of a house that used to have her in it. Her coffee percolating before I was even awake. Her voice talking back to the morning news anchors. The particular way she laughed when something caught her off guard. All of it gone. Just me. And the quiet and the smell of a house that hadn't changed much since she left. I was 68 years old. I had spent 31 of those years as a structural engineer, had built a comfortable life, had invested carefully, and saved more carefully still. Margaret and I had done it together, the way you do everything when you've been married to someone for 4 decades without even noticing you're doing it, just building and building, until one day you look around and realize you've made something solid. After she passed, my son Derek had started paying attention to me in ways he never had before. I noticed. I want to be clear about that. I noticed, from the very beginning. Derek was 46 years old and had spent most of his adult life making decisions that landed just slightly sideways from good sense. Not dramatically wrong. Never dramatically anything, just a degree or two off in every direction, accumulating into a life that never quite added up the way he'd hoped. His landscaping business had failed 3 years before Margaret died. His investment in his friend's restaurant had evaporated inside of 14 months. He and his wife Sabrina lived in a house they couldn't quite afford, drove cars that cost more than they should have, and wore the particular tight expression of people who are always about $6,000 away from a genuine crisis. I had helped them, over the years. I had helped them more than I should have, and Margaret had warned me about it with that particular calm tone she used when she'd already made up her mind, but was giving me the space to arrive at the same conclusion on my own. "Walter," she had said, maybe 8 months before she got sick, "you keep filling a bucket that has a hole in the bottom." I had nodded and kept filling anyway. That was my mistake, and it was mine to own. After Margaret died, Derek's attention to me sharpened into something that felt, at first, like love. He called more. He came by the house. He started asking about my health with a concern that touched me. In those early hollow months, when I was still learning how to move through rooms that felt wrong without her, I let myself believe my son had grown up. I let myself believe grief had clarified something in him. What it had actually clarified was my net worth. I found out the way you find out things you were better off not knowing by accident. In a moment not designed for revelation, Derek and Sabrina had come over for dinner one Sunday in March, about 8 months after Margaret's passing. I had gone upstairs to get a sweater, and I was coming back down the stairs when I heard them in the kitchen. Their voices low and specific in the way that means what's being said is not meant to travel. "The house alone is worth $900," Sabrina was saying. "And that's before the investment accounts." He mentioned a trust, Derek said. "Trusts can be structured all kinds of ways. We need to understand what he actually has and how it's held before we start making moves." "He's not going to tell me that." A pause. Then Sabrina's voice again. Something careful in it. Something that had been thought about before this moment. "He doesn't have to tell you. Ninth, he just has to trust you enough to give you access." I stood on the 3rd step from the bottom of my own staircase and understood, with the particular clarity of a thing you almost knew, but hadn't let yourself know, that my son and his wife were discussing my estate the way contractors discuss a renovation, measuring and calculating before the first wall comes down. I went back upstairs. I put on my sweater. I came downstairs and said nothing, because I had learned, over 68 years of living, that silence is not the absence of power. Silence is how you figure out what someone is actually doing before they know you're watching. I did not call Derek out that night. I called my granddaughter Lily. Lily was 23 years old, Margaret's daughter's child, and she was in her 2nd year of law school at Georgetown. She had Margaret's eyes and Margaret's way of going completely still when she was thinking hard about something, a quality I had always found extraordinary in both of them. She was sharp in the specific way that comes not from showing off but from paying attention. And she loved me in the uncomplicated way that grandchildren sometimes love grandparents without history, without resentment, without the complicated accounting that lives between parents and children. I told her what I had heard. I told her all of it, including the parts that made me feel foolish. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. "Grandpa," she said, when I finished, "have you made any changes to your estate documents since Grandma passed?" I told her I hadn't gotten around to it. "Okay," she said. "I'm coming this weekend. Don't say anything to Derek. Don't change your behavior at all. Just act exactly the same as you always do." That was in March. By April, Lily had connected me with an estate attorney in Richmond named Patricia Holt, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and a manner so direct it was almost aggressive, which I found enormously comforting. By May, my estate had been restructured entirely. The house transferred into a revocable living trust with Lily, named as successor trustee. My investment accounts were repositioned. A general power of attorney that I hadn't even remembered signing, an old document from the year Margaret had her hip surgery, was formally revoked, with paperwork filed in the appropriate offices. Patricia had looked at that old POA document with an expression that was not quite alarm but was in that neighborhood. "This is very broad," she said. "It would have given someone significant authority over your financial affairs." "I didn't realize," I said. "Most people don't," she said, "until it matters." Through all of this, I said nothing to Derek. I came to Sunday dinners. I asked about his projects. I listened to Sabrina talk about a kitchen renovation they were considering. I behaved like a man who had not heard anything on that staircase in March. A man whose documents were sitting exactly where they'd always been. A man who was, perhaps, getting a little slower, a little more forgetful. The way men my age supposedly did. I want to say something about that. Because it matters. I did not pretend to be confused or incompetent. I did not play at being diminished. I simply did not offer information I wasn't asked for. There is a difference, and it's an important one. By October, Derek was calling me more frequently. The calls had a particular quality to them, a warmth that was engineered rather than felt, and underneath the warmth, questions. Questions about whether I'd updated my will. Questions about whether I'd thought about simplifying things, financially speaking. Questions about whether I'd considered that it might be easier for everyone if I had someone, a family member. Someone who could handle things quickly if needed, with access to accounts, just in case. "In case of what?" I asked him once. "In case something happens," he said. "God forbid. But at our ages, Dad, you have to think about these things. At our ages," he was 46. I let that go. In late October, he brought up the anniversary. "Sabrina and I want to take you to dinner," he said, "for Mom's anniversary. Somewhere really nice. Just the three of us." He named a restaurant downtown. Italian. The kind of place with white tablecloths and a sommelier who takes himself seriously. "You shouldn't be alone that day." I told him that was very thoughtful. I told him I appreciated it. I called Lily that same evening. "He wants to take me to dinner on November 14th, I said. There was a pause on her end. "Where?" I told her. "That's 45 minutes from your house," she said. "Yes," I said. "I noticed that too." Another pause. And then Lily said what I had been thinking but hadn't said out loud yet. "Grandpa, if you're across town for 2 hours on a Wednesday evening, the house is empty," I said. We were quiet together for a moment, the way you can be quiet with someone you trust. "I want to be sure," I said. "I don't want to assume the worst about my own son without being sure." "Okay," Lily said. "Then let's make sure." She drove up from D.C. the following weekend. We sat at my kitchen table with Patricia Holt on speakerphone and talked through what needed to happen. Patricia confirmed, again, that the estate documents were airtight. The house was in the trust. Derek had no legal authority over anything I owned. There was nothing in the safe in my study. I want to be precise about this. There was nothing in that safe that could be used against me. Old insurance documents. A watch that had belonged to my father. A photograph of Margaret from the year we got married, which I kept there for reasons I've never fully understood. maybe because it felt protected. But someone who didn't know what was in that safe might believe there was something worth taking. We left it alone. We left everything exactly as it appeared to be. On November 13th, the night before the anniversary, I drove to Lily's apartment in D.C. and had dinner with her and her roommate. I told her I needed the company, which was true. We ate pasta and watched something on television, and I fell asleep in the guest room at 9:30, like an old man who had driven too far, which I had. On the morning of November 14th, I called Derek and confirmed our dinner reservation. He sounded warm and easy, the way someone sounds when things are going according to plan. 7 o'clock, he said. I'll pick you up at 6:30. I'll be ready, I said. I called Patricia Holt. I called a detective named Raymond Goss, who had been recommended by Patricia for situations that were still developing. A careful man who did not use more words than necessary. I told them both what I expected to happen. Raymond asked me one direct question. Did I want to intercept or document? I thought about it. Document first, I said. Then intercept. That's the smarter call, he said. I spent the afternoon of Margaret's anniversary the way I always did. I sat in the backyard with her gardening gloves on the bench beside me, and I talked to her the way I'd gotten into the habit of doing when no one was around to hear it. I told her about Lily and how well she was doing. I told her about the maple tree losing its leaves early. I told her I was handling things. And I told her I was sorry it had come to this. That our son had become this particular kind of person. And I told her I didn't fully understand how that had happened, and I suspected I bore some portion of the responsibility. I went inside and changed my shirt, and was standing at the front window at 6:28 when Derek's car came up the street. He came to the door with his coat collar up against the November cold, and when I opened it, he hugged me. Actually hugged me, with both arms and said, "How you doing, Dad? You doing okay today?" "Getting through it," I said, which was the honest answer. In the car, Sabrina asked about my health and whether I'd been sleeping, and whether I'd thought any more about looking at those retirement communities she'd mentioned, the ones with the activities and the medical staff on site. I said I hadn't given it much thought. She said she really did think I should consider it. That a man my age, living alone, you just never know. A man my age. I looked out the window at the streets going past and said nothing. The restaurant was exactly what Derek had described, white tablecloths, a sommelier who explained things at length, a menu that used more words than were strictly necessary to describe a piece of fish. We ordered. We drank wine. Derek was attentive in a way that would have looked, to anyone watching, like a devoted son taking his grieving father to dinner on a hard anniversary. At 7:45, Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at it under the table, and something in his face changed, not dramatically, just a shift around the eyes. A tightening that he covered quickly. "Sorry," he said. "Work thing. I should take this outside for just a second." He was gone for 6 minutes. When he came back, he was calmer than before, settled into something, and he refilled my wine glass with a generosity that was slightly too deliberate. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," he said. "Just a supplier thing. Nothing to worry about." We stayed until 9:15. The drive home took 40 minutes in light traffic. When we turned onto my street, I saw Derek's hands shift on the steering wheel. A small, involuntary adjustment, and I understood that we were approaching a moment he had either succeeded in or failed in, and he was about to find out which. He pulled into my driveway and said he'd walk me to the door. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I want to," he said. The porch light was on. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open and reached for the light switch, and the hallway filled with light, and Derek was standing behind me when I heard Raymond Goss's voice from the direction of my study. "Mr. Crane," he said. "We're ready when you are." Derek went completely still. I stepped aside and let him see the hallway, and the 2 police officers standing near the study door, and Raymond Goss with a notepad, and Lily sitting on the 3rd step of the staircase, with her hands folded in her lap, looking at her uncle with an expression that contained no surprise whatsoever. Derek said my name. Just that, Dad, in a voice I hadn't heard from him since he was young. Something cracked open in it. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about Margaret in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. I thought about the bucket with the hole in the... I thought about Sabrina's voice, measured and cold, saying, "He doesn't have to tell you. He just has to trust you enough." "Your wife broke the window on the back door," Raymond said to Derek. "She was inside the house for approximately 35 minutes. Officers were waiting when she came out." Derek's mouth moved, but nothing came out. "The safe was empty," Raymond continued. "Has been for about 3 weeks." "Derek," I said, and waited until he looked at me. "The house is in a trust. I don't have a power of attorney. I haven't had one since April. And once so, there's nothing in this house that gives either of you any legal authority over anything I own. There was never going to be anything." He stared at me. I watched him try to find a version of this that he could argue his way out of, and I watched him fail to find one. "Patricia Holt filed the revocation documents in May," Lily said from the stairs, still calm, still folded into herself. 7 months ago." Derek looked at his daughter, his niece, my granddaughter, the young woman who had driven up from D.C. every other weekend for 8 months to make sure I was protected. And I saw something move across his face that might, if he had been a different kind of person, have become something useful. Shame, maybe. The recognition of what he had chosen to be, but he was who he was. He turned back to me and said, "Dad, I can explain." "You don't need to," I said. The officers moved toward him. Sabrina had already been placed under arrest. Breaking and entering, the officers told me, was the primary charge. There would be others, Patricia had said, depending on what the investigation turned up. And there would be an investigation. Raymond Goss was thorough. I stood in my hallway after they were gone and looked at the ordinary objects of my life. The coat rack by the door, the rug Margaret had chosen the year we moved in, the photograph of the two of us at Cape Hatteras in 1987, hanging on the wall beside the thermostat, and I breathed slowly in and out. Lily came downstairs and stood beside me. "Grandpa," she said. "I know," I said. She put her hand through my arm the way her grandmother used to, and we stood there in the hallway of my house on the anniversary of the hardest loss of my life, and I felt something that was not quite peace, but was in the direction of it. Something settled, something solid. The way a structure is solid when you've built it right, when you've checked every joint and accounted for every load, when you've done the math and trusted the math and built accordingly. Margaret had always said I was better at building things than I was at knowing when to stop helping people who were determined to need help forever. She had been right, the way she was usually right. What I had finally understood, in the months between that Sunday in March and this November night, was that there is a version of love that hollows people out instead of filling them. I had loved my son in that way for too long, and I could not know for certain what he would have become if I had loved him differently. That was not a question I could answer, but I could build something solid. And I had, and it had held. 3 weeks later, I drove to Georgetown to have dinner with Lily. We went to a small Vietnamese place she liked near her apartment, and we ate soup and talked about her classes and the case study she was writing for her property law seminar. At the end of the meal, she looked at me and said, "How are you actually doing?" I thought about it honestly, the way she deserved. "I'm all right," I said. "I'm genuinely all right." She nodded like she believed me, and I was glad, because it was true. The charges moved through the system the way these things do, slowly and without drama. Sabrina took a plea. Derek's attorney argued for leniency on the basis of financial stress, which struck me as an interesting argument, given the circumstances. But I had decided not to spend what was left of my energy being bitter about that. I had a house. I had my accounts. I had Lily and her mother and the particular satisfaction of a man who had paid attention when it mattered. I still kept the photograph of Margaret in the safe. There was no reason to move it. I liked knowing it was there, protected, in a house that was mine. In every way the law could make something a person's own. November passed. December came, in cold and clear. I raked the last of the leaves from the backyard and stood for a moment with the rake in my hand, looking at the garden where Margaret had spent so many afternoons, and I told her that I thought I had handled it about as well as a man in my position could hope to handle something like this. I told her I thought she would have approved of Lily, and that I already knew she would have approved of Patricia Holt, because Margaret had always had deep respect for direct women who did not soften bad news. I told her I missed her the way you miss the thing your life was organized around. That particular ache that doesn't diminish so much as it becomes familiar. Something you carry rather than something that carries you. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Then I put the rake against the fence and went inside and made coffee, because November 14th had come and gone, and I was still here. In my house. In my life. Everything exactly where I had put it. That was enough. Most days, that was more than enough.